So somebody needs to go there and get our representatives to understand what limited powers mean, what the 10th Amendment means, and if it doesn't say you can do it, then you can't. And so if the Constitution doesn't give the federal government the authority to do something, then it has to mind its own business and butt out. Anyway, I know I'm using up a lot of time, but the real key is, and I'll answer all your questions on any issues that you want, but a lot of people, I'm sure you're sick and tired when you go to the voting booths and there's a Republican and a Democrat, and you know in your heart that you're voting for the lesser of two evils. You're voting against the Democrat, so you're voting for a Republican because you dislike the Democrat less. I'm going to give everybody in Connecticut a real opportunity to go to the voting booth and vote for somebody instead of against somebody.
Whoa.
Yes.
Hi. Peter, thank you. You've already answered one of the questions I've asked the other candidate running for senator for Connecticut. And I wanted to know if you could elaborate on it. My question to them has been, what specifically would you cut? You said the Department of Energy.
Well, I want to cut a lot of departments. I mean, most of what the government is doing, whether it's the Department of Education, there are a lot of departments. There's nothing in the Constitution that says the federal government should have any involvement in education. There were schools. When the Founding Fathers wrote the Constitution, it's not like there were no kids in school. We had teachers. We had schools. If they wanted the federal government doing it, they would have written it in there. Yep. They did it. The problem is the Department of Education spends $80 billion a year. Where does it get the money? They take it from us. So that's $80 billion that we don't have to spend on education. Why do we want Washington doing it? And of course, one of the things that Washington has done is, through their policies, they have driven the cost of a college education through the roof. Before the government got involved, college was cheap. My father went to the University of Connecticut. His parents didn't have any money, right? My grandfather was a carpenter in Connecticut. He actually worked on the Yale Bowl. He had 8 kids. My father was the youngest. And they didn't have any money to send him to college. So my father got a job working as a waiter, worked his way through college. He graduated with no debt. Kids can't do that today. The question is, why is college so expensive? It should be cheap. Given the fact that so many people are now going to college, right? You have economies of scale. It should be dirt cheap to educate kids. The only reason it's not is because the government is involved. If you get the government out of it, and it's mainly through these federal programs of subsidized student loans, what happens is the federal government says if you want to go to college, they'll guarantee a loan. You can go out and borrow. Any kid can go out and borrow money because the government will guarantee it. And so that means there's no check on the price of college tuitions. Colleges raise their tuitions every single year. University of Connecticut, again, just voted to raise its tuitions. College tuitions are going up even though the economy is collapsing. Even though the price of everything else is going down, the price of college tuition is going up because the government is in there. If the government pulled out of the student loan market, college tuitions would collapse overnight because colleges would have no students. Nobody could afford to pay these tuitions without government money. If the government doesn't guarantee the loans, no bank is going to lend to a student to go to college. So what's going to happen? The colleges are going to have to slash tuition so that they can deliver an affordable product to the end consumer. Otherwise, they're going to have empty classrooms, which they're not going to do. So we can have, lower costs. The same thing applies to healthcare. I mean, why is healthcare so expensive? Because the government has run up the price. Healthcare should be getting cheaper. Just like cell phones, just like laptop computers, just like plasma TVs. See, the government always says, well, the reason healthcare is so expensive is because it's getting better. Well, so are cell phones. Everything is getting better and getting cheaper because the government's not involved. When the free market is allowed to work, you get quality and you get low prices. And there are simple reforms that we can make to solve the problem in healthcare, which is runaway costs, that will cost the taxpayer nothing. And the savings will be almost immediate. Right now, all they're talking about in Washington is ways to grow government, which is going to make the problem worse.
Ways to control us.
We can solve it. Yeah, they just want to require us to buy health insurance. The best thing to do on healthcare, there are a lot of simple things the government can do. They could, we could have tort reform. We can stop mandating coverage. We can have, interstate competition. But the single best thing the government can do right now to bring health costs under control is to end the subsidy that causes so many Americans to opt to take their health insurance from their employer instead of on their own. Right? Most people, you don't buy your life insurance, your fire insurance, your auto insurance. You don't get that from your employer. Why do we all get health insurance from employers? It's because of the tax code. Because the government has given us an incentive Because if your employer pays you in wages, well, then you get taxed. But if they pay you in insurance premium, in health insurance, you don't get taxed. So everybody wants to earn insurance instead of wages. Well, that doesn't make any sense. I want to equalize that. I just assume have somebody who gets insurance from his employer be able to say, you know what, I don't want the insurance, I'll take the cash, and take the cash tax-free. And then you decide. Individuals can decide how much insurance do they want. They can buy a policy that's appropriate for them. Maybe they don't want a $10,000 a year policy. Maybe they can get by on a $3,000 a year policy, and they can put the other $7,000 tax-free in their pocket. Because too many people are using insurance to pay for ordinary, everyday medical expenses. That's why the costs are running out of control. People sprain their ankle, they get the flu, and they're using insurance. These things should be paid for with cash. And it used to be, before the government was involved. I mentioned my father. My father was in the insurance business. He sold health insurance in the 1960s. His most popular policy, the entire annual premium, was $25. That's all it cost. Now, sure, there's been a little bit of inflation since then, but $25? And that was when you didn't get it from your employer. You went out and bought it on your own. It was individual policies. But the government got involved and screwed the whole thing up. But we need serious cuts. I mean, if you look at, I just said the government has doubled in size since 2000. Is anybody in this room getting anything from government that they weren't getting 10 years ago? Wasn't the country here 10 years ago? Besides unemployment. The country was here. The roads were here. The police were here. The defense was here. What wasn't here was $2 trillion of government spending that didn't exist. And even go back into 1990. The country was here. You know, the government keeps getting bigger. Look at the state of Connecticut. The state of Connecticut is a fiscal disaster. Yet we have an income tax. 20 years ago we had no income tax and we were in better shape. But the state was here. Right? The police were here, the fire department was here, the roads were working, the schools were here. The more money you give government, the more money they're going to spend. We just have to stop the spending. And the way I would do it, you know, people talk about a balanced budget amendment. We don't need a balanced budget amendment. All we need is a couple of senators with some guts to not let the national debt ceiling go up. That's what, if I'm in, one of the first things I'm going to do, because they just increased the debt ceiling by $2 trillion, but that $2 trillion is going to be up in less than a year. That's how fast we're blowing through this money. But if I can filibuster the increase in the debt ceiling, then that's it. And if they can't raise the debt ceiling, they can't spend. See, every time somebody threatens to do that, they say, well, but if you do that, you'll shut down the government. Well, that's not going to scare me.
Who cares?
Because if we don't shut down the government's going to shut down the country. So let's do it. Let's call their bluff. And the thing is, if we don't raise the debt ceiling, they can't raise taxes. They don't have, because they have to pass that. They automatically have to slash spending across the board. And because if they don't want to decide what they want to cut, then everything gets cut. Which is fine. Because if we just run up these deficits, they're trying to pretend that if we borrow the money, it doesn't cost us something. It costs us more. We got to pay it back with interest. And if we can't borrow, then it's massive inflation. Because that's what's coming. Because our creditors, the Japanese, the Saudis, they're not going to lend us money forever. They understand that we can't pay it back. And when we stop lending, either we make the cuts or Ben Bernanke cranks up the printing presses, and then we're finished. Right? Then we have a real economic problem. Because then it's not about losing your money. Worrying about losing money in the bank is worried about your money losing its value. Because that's the real crisis. When you can't buy anything because the money is worthless. And that's where we're going if we don't change. Any other questions?
I just had a quick question. You were talking about things you're going to cut. One of the things, Treasury just sold some notes last week, and they were the quote-unquote ghost investors because the big countries, China, Japan, England, weren't buying our debt in the record amounts that they've been buying. So there are these ghost investors that were buying. My question is, can you cut enough, quick enough, or are you going to have to cut and also raise taxes to balance?
No, there is absolutely no way we can raise taxes. You know, people talk about, you know, we got to compromise. There is no compromise. You know, we have to cut spending. If you just raise taxes, they'll just keep spending that money and more. We got to draw the line. I actually want to reduce taxes, but I understand that tax cuts without spending cuts are meaningless. Because if the cost of government is not what it taxes, it's what it spends. Because those are the resources it drains out of the private sector. See, if it doesn't take it from us in taxes, it borrows it. But when you borrow the money, you destroy the capital. Economies grow because of savings. Because savings is where capital comes from. That's